Yep.
Snook conversation.
Little change in topic. So, obviously, you see that the next presentation you're going to have is two records on Snook. So, since that's two new records, figure give y'all a little bit of background on what we've been observing the species for the last little while. So, those familiar, Snook prefer a subtropical inshore habitat. South Florida, South Texas is where they really range throughout the Gulf. Prefer mangroves, beaches, seagrass, and there's limited survival of the species less than 60 degrees Fahrenheit. They are extremely freshwater tolerant. Really, if you're comparing the two between snook and spotted sea trout or red drum, essentially you're looking at a species in spotted sea trout and red drum that can tolerate sub 40-degree temperatures for a little while. Snook are on the upper end of 45 degrees, so that's really the reason why they haven't really inhabited this area too much. So, like I said, there's a concentration in coastal Florida, Big Bend, southern Texas down to Brazil. They're protandric hermaphrodites, meaning that they begin their lives as male, and then somewhere between 17 and 22 inches, some of them transition into females, and that's when they become sexually mature and spawn. Excellent table fare, highly targeted by recreational anglers in Florida and in Texas, and really throughout the range. So some of our observations, staff's observations, we had an initial report that was recorded by us in 2017. It was a fish caught out of Pascagoula that was 17 inches. We went back and looked through museum records, and there was a single observation in 1937. And if I remember correctly, it was either Bayou Cadet or Point Caddy. So I wasn't really familiar with exactly where it was, but um, it could have been either one of those. Either way, it was a positive finding. And since 2017, both us and staff at the lab have recorded instances of. Ready, the screen's off. We've recorded instances of snook, but it's been about once a year. And then I just recite the rest of it, but it culminated into this year where in the last 18 months we've had 16 observations of this species, which is a fair amount for us. These range anywhere from juveniles all the way up to subadults, so basically cast net size to hook and line size, with one instance of a fish being caught at 10 pounds, which was fairly impressive. That fish was likely here for multiple years and could be evidence of what I'll talk about here in a minute. And we actually have multiple throughout Biloxi Bay, so it's not restricted just to Pascagoula drainage. We've had observations in Biloxi Bay as well. We've also had increased occurrences in Alabama, our neighboring state, and they saw an increase in observations starting in 2017. So really, this is looking like a species that's kind of skip hopping along the Gulf and made it to us. So obviously, we've got some theories behind what is going on, but we're not completely sure. The first one, when we first saw the single event, there was a thought that it could be just larval displacement from their native range. So obviously, when we have events like hurricanes or anything else like that, that stirs up the water pretty well. If y'all were here after Hurricane Katrina, there was a big push of red grouper that occurred for the few years after that. That was kind of one of those instances. And when you see this, obviously you would expect that you would see juveniles or adults, but that observation would decrease over time with the absence of any events. Or we have an established local population, which is getting to the point where we're kind of leaning that direction with our observations. So we could have started with larval displacement, or it could be range expansion where they're skip hopping across the Gulf. But obviously, with this theory, you'd have increasing occurrence as more individuals become spawning capable. They reach that size where they shift over to female. And obviously, if this is the case, then there's a thermal refuge that holds the bulk of the individuals in winter months. Um, some considerations for y'all, just as we're thinking about the species. So, range expansion could lead to a larger fishery if we increase observations, everything else like that. You could have more and more folks targeting them and catching them. The potential for freeze conditions should make any regulations ineffective for long term sustainability. I made this presentation before Snowmageddon, so I'm actually going to get out on a boat with a crew after this, and we're going to go look and see about cold kills. But I've got a couple pictures to show right after this presentation about that. And we'll continue to monitor and encourage anglers to report catches. The lab recently put out a reporting mechanism for anglers. We're going to be just kind of passing back and forth information as it goes through. But before I move on to that state record presentation, All right.
Questions? All right, moving on to the records, Finfish records.
All right. So we've got 2 conventional tackle records. One of these is going to be a youth, but it is common snook. It's a new record at 15.36 ounces. So, like I said, we have multiple observations, but this angler was the first one to bring one in for a record. Is Mr. Vince Ray. There's a picture of the fish, and there is Mr. Ray with the fish. And not 2 days later, we had a youth conventional record come in. It was Mr. Zach Broussard, son of Eric, back here in the back. It was 8.96 ounces, so it was going to be a record no matter what because the record wasn't established, but it does meet the 50% threshold. There is the fish, and there's the young man with the fish. So all we need is a recommendation to adopt those new state records.
And if I could recognize that the
house
behind him, if I can get a gauge on that somehow. All right. Do we have a motion to recommend the adoption of the new state records?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.